I'd like to do a little shout out to the AIA San Diego Preservation Committee, who is hosting this presentation, and I'm also a member of. We meet via Zoom the first Thursday of every month at noon, and new members are always welcome. All right, what is modernism? Well, there's a lot of different definitions that I found, but I thought that this one kind of worked the best for all the genres we're discussing. It's a style or movement in the arts that aims to break with classical and traditional forms. And when did modernism begin? Well, it varies by design field and it can be somewhat subjective, but we will loosely focus on the years 1890s through the 1910s. And it's around 1900 when modernism had fully taken root in most disciplines of design. We'll also focus on design in America and touch on influences from abroad. So we'll start with architecture. And I'll note that for each genre that we discuss, I'll give an overview of the era that came before to provide context and contrast for how dramatically different modernism was from the past. I will then follow up with ways early modernism influenced design today, but I would also like to hear from all of you. So as each genre is discussed, feel free to leave comments in the chat related to that design genre, sorry, to how you think early modernism has influenced the world we live. And then I will do my best to, or MJ will kind of help recap those comments after each genre is discussed. So what came before modern architecture? Well, I looked to the Virginia McAllister's book called A Field Guide to American Houses. And there are Victorian houses and there are eclectic houses. And these are what were being built during this time frame of 1890s and 1910s, just to give everyone a sense of what architecture was looking like. Some of these dates these date ranges kind of bled over beyond or started a little sooner, and it just varied by region. So we had in Victorian houses, there was stick style, Queen Anne, shingle, Richardsonian, Romanesque, folk Victorian, and what's not featured is the Second Empire. These are all homes that are historically designated in San Diego. And then I mentioned eclectic houses. And so we had colonial revival, neoclassical, Tudor, Italian Renaissance, Mission, and what's not shown is Churrigueresque and the Beaux-Arts styles. So Virginia McAllister defines modern houses as well, starting in the year 1900 and going to present day. I'm showing Prairie and Craftsman because these are the styles that were being designed within the date frame that we are looking at. And so there's many more modern styles, and we'll discuss those later. But the modern movement in domestic architecture developed in two stages during the years from 1900 to 1940. The first phase, the arts and crafts movement, deliberately turned its back on the use of historical precedent for decoration and design. Ornamentation was not eliminated, but merely modernized to remove most traces of historic origins. That's really important, that ornamentation was not eliminated, but just modernized. These houses still had a lot of ornament. So this led to two distinct styles. The Prairie style, led by Frank Lloyd Wright, who designed many houses in this style during the period of 1900 to 1913, and the Craftsman style, led by the Green brothers and others, from 1905 to 1930, and that was primarily in Southern California, or it started in Southern California. Both styles were very popular, and examples can be seen all over the US. A second phase of the modern movement began after World War II as a full-scale reaction against all previous architectural styles, and we'll touch on these later. The architect I'll be featuring dabbled in both Prairie and Craftsman styles, as well as Spanish and Mission styles, but ultimately created the purest form of modern design as we know today. Any guess to who the featured architect will be? And I'll give a hint. One of his residences was shown on the previous slide, which I will go to. And if anyone wants to participate here, you can put A, B, C, D, or E in the chat. All right, hope that gave everyone enough time. So we're gonna, the answer is E. This is the Peter Price cottage in the South Park neighborhood of San Diego, and it was designed by Irving Gill. He was an American architect and is considered a pioneer in the modern movement of architecture. He was born in Tule, New York. His father was a farmer and later a carpenter. Gill worked as a draftsman in Syracuse before moving to Chicago in 1890. A year later, Gill went to apprentice for Adler and Sullivan, where he briefly crossed paths with Frank Lloyd Wright. A side note about Sullivan, he's been called the father of skyscrapers and father of modernism. He was an influential architect of the Chicago School and a mentor to Frank Lloyd Wright and an inspiration to the Chicago group of architects who have come to be known as the Prairie School. The phrase form follows function is also attributed to him. After 2 years with Adler and Sullivan, Gill moved to San Diego, where he partnered with Joseph Falkenham and then later William Hebbard. While partnered with Hebbard, Gill designed a handful of experimental cottages for parcels of land he purchased in San Diego. Some of these cottages have survived, but most have been altered. The cottages shown here are located in Hillcrest and Bankers Hill neighborhoods of San Diego. There's additional cottages in Sherman Heights. You can begin to see Gill's early modern style take shape. In place of ornament, he uses smooth stucco surfaces combined with the purest expressions of form, the circle, arch, square, and rectangle. Other early modern trademarks visible in these designs are the blending of indoor and outdoor spaces through use of pergolas, arcades, and vine plants consuming the plain stucco walls. So after falling out with Hebbard in early 1907, Gill entered into partnership with Frank Mead, a former employee of Hebbard and Gill. Gill and Frank Mead are believed to have designed the first modernist home in the world, the Allen House in Bonita, California. And for those not familiar with where Bonita is, it's about a 20-minute drive south of San Diego, downtown San Diego. You can see the house here on the left, and it is still very much extant and well preserved. Historians often point to the Steiner House in Austria by Adolf Loos, which as the first modernist home, but the Bonita House was built 3 years prior in 1907. Their partnership lasted only 7 months, but during these months, they also collaborated on the Melville Clobber House in Bankers Hill, which is in the upper right. That house has been demolished. The Wheeler Bailey House in La Jolla, which is the bottom right, and that is very much still intact and very well preserved. And the Homer Laughlin House in South Pasadena, which I'll talk about in a second. So the Laughlin House had many experimental design features, including walls that coved seamlessly into concrete floors for sanitary reasons and to eliminate dust trapping surfaces. The house featured a central vacuum system with an outlet in each room taking dust to the furnace. If you haven't noticed, picked up, Gill was very much of a germaphobe, and his designs definitely reflected that. This house had a garbage disposal in the kitchen that dropped garbage to an incinerator in the basement. The house was equipped with an automatic gas heater and Hygeia water filter. The ice box in the kitchen had access from the outside, precluding the need for ice delivery, the ice delivery man to have to walk through the house. Milk was also delivered this way. This was a really common feature that Gill designed into his homes, and you can see in the image on the right, there's this kind of side entrance into a courtyard, and that's how the ice delivery and the milkman would enter the kitchen at the rear of the house. Homer Laughlin Jr. He was an automobile enthusiast and later manufacturer. And so Gill designed him a garage that had an automatic car washing machine and a service station like maintenance pit. Mail was delivered through a mailbox flush with the front door. And then lastly, Gill's incorporation of nature into his residential designs also began with the Laughlin House. He included an open courted garden room. So the image on the the left is the front door, front entrance, and you can see daylight through the house all the way to the rear court. The middle image is that courtyard, and the right are floor plans showing the large open patio at the rear of the property and the house kind of U-shaping around that courtyard. And you can't talk about Irving Gill without mentioning his innovative construction techniques. He was an early adopter of the tilt slab construction system. He was not the first he did not develop it. It was actually another gentleman by the last name Aiken. But Gill saw it as a way to produce architecture in a more cost-effective way. It didn't work out so well in the end, but he did build, because it cost more than he was anticipating it would from a labor standpoint. But he did build a number of these homes and buildings using this tilt slab construction system. This is the La Jolla Women's Club. It was built in 1914 to 1915. And you can go see it today. If you want to have a wedding, you can go rent it as a venue. All right, so what came after? There are more modern styles that followed. We have streamlined, modern, minimal, traditional, organic, geometric, post and beam, custom ranch. There are a ton of modern styles that came out of this era, and they are some of them are continued to be built today. These are all homes, again, that are historically designated in San Diego. And you can see in the streamlined modern, this was starting in the mid 1920s, and it has a lot of, it resembles what Gill was doing, 20 years prior. So he was well ahead of his time. So MJ, were there any comments in the chat about just other influences that this early modern era has had on design?
No.
Okay.
No, Heather, nothing.
All right. Well, if anyone has any thoughts, we can discuss it at the end. I'm going to move on to music. So what came before? In short, it was the Romantic era. So the piece that we heard by Richard Strauss at the beginning, that was composed during the Romantic era, which is characterized by a focus on subjective emotion and personal experience, national pride and musical richness or flamboyance requiring virtuosic skill. And before the Romantic era, music was often stiff and rigid, beautiful, but focused on achieving an almost academic perfection. The rules were strict. Romantic composers started to bend these rules, playing with new ideas, sounds, and even instruments. By the late Romantic period, composers were obsessed with pushing the limits of music. And this is where we see the transition into modernism, characterized by freedom and experimentation with traditional rules of musical composition. So the late 19th century was an important transitional era as composers rejected the constraints of the past and looked to create a new world in the new century. So defining modern music. In music history, things were pretty clear for a while. You had the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, Baroque, Classical, and Romantic eras, each with their own set of very distinct styles and composers. Modern music is not as easy to define. Many music styles emerged from the early modern era, including Impressionism, Neoclassicism, Expressionism, Primitivism, and atonality. These music historians can agree that modern music made its debut around 1890, but there's less agreement on when the era ended. Some point to the 30s, others point to World War II. So to simplify it, modernism was all about defying convention to an extreme degree. For example, modernist music sometimes rejects tonality, music that isn't anchored in any key and thus tends to feel unsettled or off. And I will play some audio clips and just keep that feeling in mind. Does it make you feel unsettled or off? Today, I'm going to talk about an American composer named Charles Ives. He was born in Connecticut. He studied music with a variety of teachers, including his father, George, a town bandmaster whose eclectic tastes influenced his son. And by the age of 14, he was a professional church musician. He graduated Yale University, where he studied music with the renowned Horatio Parker, who honed his skills in harmony, counterpoint, and form. Parker and Ives did not always see eye to eye, as Ives was already showing a fondness for bold dissonances that had no place in Parker's more traditional style. After graduating from Yale, Ives worked as a church musician and composer, but eventually decided to pursue a career in the insurance business around 1907, where he was extremely successful. He actually had one of the largest insurance companies in the United States at the time. It was around this time he got married and started a family. And just an interesting side note, his wife's name was Harmony. In his spare time, he continued to compose, though his works were rarely performed. He's widely regarded as one of the first American composers of international significance. So in 1908, he composed The Unanswered Question. And it's for a presentation of this length, I'm not going to play the entire composition. It's just shy of 6 minutes, but I will start kind of halfway through. We'll listen to a little bit of it, and I think it'll be enough of a sampling that you can kind of get the feel of what, to get a sense of what this music felt like. So a little bit of context on this piece. You will hear string instruments play throughout the entire piece. And then you'll hear a trumpet solo come in. And the trumpet, and this is per Charles Ives' notes on the piece. So the trumpets ask the question of existence. So, and then you'll hear flutes come in, and the flutes are trying to respond to that question of existence, but they don't have an answer. And as the piece progresses, the trumpet continues to ask the question of existence, and the flutes respond, and they become more and more frustrated, and they then angered. Ives himself states the woodwind quartet represents, and woodwinds are the flutes. The woodwind quartet represents those who try to provide the answer, but fail to come up with a satisfactory one. And eventually their dissonance is extreme and they give up. So he was attempting to express in music that unanswered question of life, of why am I here? So we're going to start this a couple minutes in. Oops, sorry about that. Oh no. Oh, that's not a good sign. Oh. Whoops. All right, here we go. Start around 2:44. So these are the strings that play throughout. That was the trumpet solo asking the question of existence.
We make it easy. Toyota, let's go places.
So sorry, there's something happening in the background on my screen. Ugh. Apologize for that. Okay, so this goes on. The trumpet asks the question, the flutes respond, and the flutes get more agitated, and you can hear that in the music until eventually they just give up in trying to respond. So this musical masterpiece was over a half a century ahead of its time, writing in a collage-like planes of contrasting styles. So Ives was among the first composers to engage in a systematic program of experimental music with musical techniques including polytonality, polyrhythm, tone clusters, and quarter tones, thus foreshadowing virtually every major musical innovation of the 20th century. Don't ask me what those techniques mean. I am not a musician. The sound produced by these techniques often feels, as I mentioned before, off or unsettled. They do not solicit joy or lightheartedness. It is more commonly used to elicit fear or create tension, and therefore these techniques are often used in modern horror films, such as Psycho. So the next time you are watching that movie, you can thank Alfred Hitchcock for appreciating this Charles Ives style. And there was supposed to be sound there. There we go. Sorry if that's strong for you. So you can hear that same kind of discord, the tension in even the Psycho films. A less frightening example of Ives' influence can be heard in the song "A Day in the Life" by the Beatles. A technique used is called atonality. So I'm going to start this song about a little few minutes in, just before this kind of atonality technique takes place.
People turned away, but I just had to look, having read the
All right. Let's actually, yeah. Any comments in the chat, MJ? Okay, well, we'll keep moving on, and maybe you guys have questions at the end. So fashion, what came before the modern era of fashion? Okay. Corsets, hoop skirts, bustle dresses, also known as uncomfortable clothing. Fabric had little to no stretch, and you often had to be tailored by a professional. So today I'm going to be talking about a French fashion designer. His name was Paul Poiret, and he was one of the first lifestyle designers where he worked in all aspects of design to include perfume, shoes, furniture, rugs, textiles, and even interior design. Although he was initiated in the couture business between 1898 and 1903, he working as a designer for Jacques Doucet and then the House of Worth. Poiret never trained in the exacting crafts of couture tailoring or dressmaking. He established his own house of fashion in 1903. His design ideas began with the flat rectangle of the fabric, as did the Japanese kimonos and North African kaftans he admired. They then evolved through draping, not tailoring, into garments with a minimum of seams that pretty much hung from the shoulders. He would often cut fabric on the bias, which is on the diagonal, which would give garments more stretch. Innovations to follow would include the hobble skirt, harem pants and pantaloons, and the popular lampshade skirt. One of the many things he is known for is liberating the female body from petticoats and corsets. So the hobble skirt, this was became popular in the 1910s. It was a short-lived fashion. It only lasted till about 1914. And I think it's for obvious reasons. But it had a large following. And the above newspaper clip is from the San Diego Union Tribune from 1910. And the article is reporting on an incident in New York where a woman suffered a concussion after falling while wearing a hobble skirt. The suffragettes were not a fan of hobble skirts, again, for obvious reasons. And the little caption on the photo on the left there, it says the hobble skirt. What's that? It's the speed limit skirt. So you can see, the cinched portion where he's kind of starting to experiment with maybe what is to come, and that is the Harlem or the harem pantaloons, or also known as harem pants. So instead of cinching both legs, he's now cinching each individual leg. Spurred on by the enthusiastic reception of the Ballet Russe, who performed first in Paris in 1909, Poiret designed theatrical fashions. His designs played with Eastern influences and vivid color combinations. He would often use his wife, a willing volunteer, and her name was Denise, and she often was called a living, walking mannequin of his designs, and that's her there on the right. Also in 1911 was the sorbet dress, and it's also a variation of the lampshade tunic. Here's kind of an evolution from concept to fabrication. And interesting side note about the lampshade dress. So Poiret was one of the first Parisian designers to visit America and hold fashion lectures. When he visited the US in 1913, he found himself called the king of fashion and discovered the underside of modern fashion success. His lampshade skirt had been copied far and wide. In 1914, he was the first designer to establish a Grand Couture Protection Committee and claimed design copyrights after witnessing the reckless reproduction of his label in New York and across America. He was also a bit of a marketing genius. In an early attempt to bring fashion and art together, Poiret commissioned 2 limited edition albums in 1908 and 1911 by an artist named Paul Uribe. They were rendered in laborious technique known as pochoir, stenciling. The layers of bold color brilliantly showcased Poiret's novel color palette. The vibrant illustrations of imagined worlds captivated consumers. So a story that he once told, he said, a copy was sent to each European sovereign bearing a personal, handsomely printed dedication. All of them were well received and much appreciated, with the sole exception of the one sent to Her Majesty the Queen of England, which was returned to me with a letter from a lady in waiting asking me to refrain in the future from any communication of this kind. And he never understood why they took it so badly. So what came after? Well, harem pants actually are still a thing. I didn't know that this is what they were called. I like that they were called pantaloons originally, but this is just a Google image screenshot of some of the more contemporary versions of the harem pants. The hobble skirt, for me, immediately reminded me of a pencil skirt, very constricting. And an article I found on Vogue's website actually gave a little bit of a history of the pencil skirt, and they mentioned the hobble skirt as being a kind of a precursor. We can also thank Poiret for no more corsets and more free-flowing dresses, draped dresses rather than super fitted dresses as well. All right, MJ, any other?
No comments.
Comments? Okay, that's all right. We'll keep going. We have our last genre here is dance. In the late 19th century, early modern dance artists were pioneering new forms and practices in what is now called aesthetic or free dance. These dancers disregarded ballet's strict movement vocabulary and stopped wearing corsets and point shoes in the search for greater freedom of movement. What came before? Well, the fine art of ballet probably comes to mind. There were also social dances performed at balls and parties. And to make sure you were not making a fool of yourself, dance etiquette manuals were very popular in the 19th century. Of importance was the etiquette of asking a partner to dance, appropriate conversation while dancing, the way to learn the latest steps, and of course, the importance of wearing the latest ballroom fashions. Publishers would often issue small pocket-sized manuals, such as the ballroom instructor shown here. So by the end of the 1890s, the most popular dances in America were the German, the quadrille, the waltz, the cakewalk, and a new dance, the two-step, then often called the Washington Post, after John Philip Sousa's famous march. And here's a clip of the two-step dance, just to give you a feel of what was happening just before the modern era of dance. Okay, I think we don't need to watch that whole thing, so I think you get a good idea. So the dancer I'm going to be featuring today, her name is Loie Fuller, or that was her stage name. Her full name is Marie Louise Fuller. She was born in Chicago. She was an actress and choreographer and one of the most innovative artists of the 20th century. An early free dance practitioner, Fuller developed her own natural movement and improvisation techniques. In multiple shows, she experimented with a long skirt, choreographing its movements and playing with the ways it could reflect light. By 1891, Fuller combined her choreography with silk costumes illuminated by multicolored lighting of her own design and created the serpentine dance. This became her signature dance. After much difficulty finding someone willing to produce her work, she was finally hired to perform a piece between acts of a comedy entitled Uncle Celestine and received rave reviews. So unfortunately, no film survived containing a performance by Loie Fuller, but this is a film shot by the Lumiere brothers in 1897, and it was performed by another dancer. This is performing the serpentine dance. You can see how such a vast departure this is from the two-step Washington Post dance. And the film was hand-colored. This was an attempt to represent the lighting techniques that she was using at the time. The film technology just wasn't capable of capturing color at this time, so they had to hand color everything. It's a little bit mesmerizing to me, at least. All right, so almost immediately she was replaced by imitators originally, and she successfully patented her dress, but unsuccessfully copyrighted her choreography. The court, she did go to court, and they found that the dance in question, although pleasing to the eye, was not a dramatic composition, as it failed to tell a story and portrayed no character or emotion. I would probably disagree with that, but it's a different time. So after a failed attempt of copywriting her dance, and in the hope of receiving serious artistic recognition that she was not getting in America, Fuller left for Europe in June of 1892. She became one of the first of many American modern dancers who traveled to Europe to seek recognition. So in 1893, while living in France, the picture book published illustrations of her signature dances. And so there's the serpentine, the basket. I just thought these illustrations were really beautiful. Helix. And the dress she was wearing in the beginning slide, it was called the butterfly dress. Just go back to that really quick. That was her butterfly dress. Her warm reception in Paris persuaded Fuller to remain in France, where she became one of the leading revolutionaries in the arts. Fuller became the embodiment of the Art Nouveau movement and was often identified with symbolism, as her work was seen as the perfect reciprocity between idea and symbol. So just as a side note about Loie Fuller, she frequented the Washington State quite often. And there's a museum there off the Columbia Gorge called the Maryhill Museum of Art, and they have a Loie Fuller collection. So if you're ever in that area, check it out. I think it'll be worth your time. So what came after? Early modern dance helped to free ballet and its conservative restrictions. Fuller was among the first to raise interpretive dance to the status of creative art. Modern dance continues to the present, but the focus is less on interpretation and more on acrobatic and aerial movements in groups and with partners. There are many exciting things happening at the turn of the century, and this only represents a small fraction. Fields such as fine art, aviation, industrial design, and theater were also experiencing a similar transition from traditional to modern. While researching these genres and designers, the most difficult part was deciding which to feature. I hope you found the genres and individuals featured today relevant and inspiring. I will now open the platform to discussion. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to turn your microphone on and ask, or you can also ask in the chat.
I'll ask a question. You probably would have expected that, Heather.
Yeah.
So one early modern movement in architecture that wasn't included in your discussion was the international style, which and I'm wondering, one reason for that may be, as far as I know, at least as far as I could find, there is no early international style architecture, certainly no houses, and all the examples you showed were houses in San Diego. There's later international style like 40s and 50s, but you know the genesis of the international style was really started in the teens, more prominent in the 20s and 30s. What did you look at international style? Do you know of any in San Diego?
Yeah, that was, you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that it was kind of late to show up in San Diego. And so I was trying to focus more on and late to kind of take root in America. I think it was happening more in Europe. And so, yeah, that.
The house examples you gave, it was wonderful to see examples of all those styles, all chosen from San Diego. I don't know if you've got the addresses of those, but it'd make a great architectural tour.
Yeah, no, I do have them in my notes, and if you're interested, I can provide those. I did, if you're not familiar, there's a database called CRID, CHRID San Diego, and it's the database that has all of the historically designated properties within the city. So you can filter by style, date, architect, community, and that was how kind of I found these properties.
Oh, that's a
I
great,
don't personally know anything about each of these properties other than I know this is the style that that they
that's
are.
a great resource.
Yeah.
That's great to know about. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Very enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. All right. Question from, apologize, it just says K. Neal. So why are there so many craftsman style homes in San Diego? Is that due to how many here have not been demolished? Well, craftsman has its roots out of Pasadena. So I think it's just kind of natural as we're a neighbor to Los Angeles that the style became very popular very quickly. And you can actually almost every city throughout the United States has craftsman style homes. I think just a very popular style.
So Heather, I have a question. This is David.
Hi, David.
Hi. This is really fascinating, the influences within each of the categories. I'm curious, did you discover any influences that cross categories? For instance, did music influence architecture and rhythm or in any ways? And
Yeah.
did fashion or dance? Did you find any of those influences that were cross modernism?
Yeah. So when I was researching Loie Fuller, another dancer who was mentioned in the chat, Isadora Duncan, came up, and I was gonna feature her today, but just due to time, she got the cut, unfortunately. And she was contemporaries with Paul Poiret. So she, born in San Francisco, she had similar story to Loie Fuller, just wasn't getting the recognition in America. So she moved to Paris, and this is where she met Paul Poiret, and he designed many garments for her. And there was a large party. He'd throw these magnificent parties that were themed, and he would have people like Isadora Duncan attend and wear his garments and entertain the guests. And so there was an account of her dancing on tables with 300 guests watching, and over the night there was like 900 bottles of champagne consumed. So there's a little bit of crossover there. And I would say also with dance and fashion, being able to achieve the more fluid movements of dance, you couldn't be wearing these restrictive clothes. So I think the dancers were starting to find their own fashions, while the fashion designers were kind of breaking free of these, constraints as well. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. David Marshall, it said he would argue that modernism never ended. You still see many examples built today, and I completely agree. That I hope that in this presentation, giving the examples of how early modernism has influenced, our design today is, yes, I agree that it's still continues. All right. Yes, Laura said she loved stepping outside the architecture bubble, and I agree. This was a kind of an interest of mine to see what the parallels of these different genres and what they were all doing at the same time. Oftentimes we just focus so much on our own fields of our own professions. So I'm going to scroll back up in the chat and make sure I didn't miss anyone's questions. Sean is saying is one of his favorite Beatles songs right there. Yeah. All right, well. I think that wraps it up for today, and I want to thank everyone for joining me on their lunch, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.